Well, welcome to week 10 and coming up towards the end of our course in 1251 ICT for Teachers and Learning. And I have with us here Maria, who's in the library, so it's a little bit noisy for her to use the voice. But hopefully we'll have a couple more join us. Current trend is that a few of you tend to join a little bit late in our sessions. But this week we're going to be discussing the digital technologies curriculum and how it may be a subject that you'll be asked to teach or would like to teach in lower secondary, so years 7 to 10. And certainly there'll be opportunities to teach into that area, and that may help you gain employment in whatever career path you choose with your other subject areas. And then, of course, we'll discuss some aspects of your assessment. Of course, by now you should all be completing your log of learning activities and be working on your portfolio activities. So, Maria, do you have any questions before we start? And as we wait, hopefully, a few other people to join us.
To be honest, I was not really sure about what this week was about. I was a bit confused by the readings. I wasn't really sure what I was supposed to.
Okay, now a good point. It was leading on from our discussion last week, and I didn't want to give you large sets of readings to work with, but last week and the week before there was a video clip from Akara on the digital technologies subject, and this week I was going to discuss with you some of the resources that are being developed to assist teachers in coming to grips with and teaching this new subject area. So it was really just a collection of PowerPoint presentations and suggested resources for teaching digital technologies. Does that put it into context a little bit more for you, Maria? Okay, so the idea of this week was to discuss what it would be like to actually be asked to teach digital technologies and what you might need to do to come up to speed with teaching this as a curriculum area. So the first key area that people are concerned often about is teaching of programming, but there's a number of other nuances in there, and I see we've just lost Maria for the moment, so hopefully she'll be able to join us again. I do see that there's quite a few of you watching live, so it'd be really great if you could ask questions in the Q&A, or at least introduce yourself on the Q&A so that we can include you in the discussion. And I see Christiana is joining us, which is good. And good, we've got Cara joining us as well.
Hello.
So welcome. And we had Maria just drop out for a moment. So this week,
the library's not very good at the moment for internet.
yes, it's probably rather busy with everyone doing their final exam and assignment preparations. So before we get into discussion about digital technologies, do we have any questions about your assessment? How are you going with your log of learning activities?
They're the 5 smaller ones? Or is...
Sorry, Christiana?
Are they the 5 smaller ones that we had to do?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Yeah, not too bad. There's one more that I keep putting off and I should get done.
Well, that's good. So hopefully you'll get that out of the way soon, and then we can start talking about the final portfolio items. I see we've got Greta online, which is good. So Greta and Cara, how are you going with your log of learning activities?
Good, I'm already pretty much done. I just got to do the Google Hangout one. Just do that one, so that's all.
That's good.
Yeah. They're actually easier than you thought.
Yes, they're only meant to be quite simple, easy little tasks to get you thinking about different technologies. The way I structure assessment in this course is that to pass, you do the quizzes and the log of learning activities, and that should give you enough marks to pass fairly easily. And then the portfolio items are what we use to distinguish the various higher grades. So you've got to get those portfolio activities done, but don't spend too much effort on them, because they're not going to be the ones that really distinguish between the higher grades themselves. So Maria, how are you going with your portfolio activities?
I have like one and a tiny bit left, I think.
Good.
So they're good.
Yep, so try and get all those.
And I have started on the other ones, the bigger ones.
Wonderful.
So yeah, I'm on track.
It looks like Greta is also getting them done. But yes, and get those quizzes out of the way as well. Ideally, you would have all done the quizzes earlier, but I understand that there's it's hard to get assessment done before you have to. But you will need to go back and revise some of those earlier readings that the quizzes are based on. It's fairly hard, or it's fairly easy to pass the quizzes, but you do want to get good marks for those because they help build up your overall mark fairly easily if you put a bit of effort into doing those quizzes well. Now Perry can't believe I'm not getting 5% on the quizzes when it's virtually open book. Yes, well I did have to make them reasonably difficult. They're not incredibly hard and they are open book, but yes, I get in trouble if everyone gets too higher grades too easily. So certainly with a bit of study and revision of the material and having an open book, you should be able to get quite good grades. And remember, 75% is a really good grade. 85% is sort of the highest grade. So if you're not getting 100%, don't be traumatized over that. If you're getting 85% and above, that's really equivalent to 100% if you think about it in terms of long-term aspects of the grading. But of course, do as well as you can, because that makes it then easier to get higher grades based upon the rest of your assessment. So do we have any questions about the portfolio activities? Or which ones are people thinking of doing? Because they're the ones I'm probably most concerned about, particularly for you guys who obviously are here attending the tutorials and so forth, and are so probably aiming for the higher grades.
Sorry, I missed what you said just then.
Oh, okay. Do you have any questions about the portfolio activities, the two more extended activities?
I have a question.
Yes, Maria. Or whoever asks that question. Does anyone have any questions about them?
I don't as yet.
Yeah.
Has anyone thought about which ones they're doing?
Yeah, I'm doing the tutorial one. I just haven't thought about what to do for the second one. I think once I do the first one and then sit down, and I think when we all collaborate, we kind of help each other work out what we do, so that's quite good. But once doing the first one, then I'll get onto the second one.
I understand. Just remember that for this course, I've given you extra time for that first one, so there's not a lot of time between the two. I think it's only 2 weeks, so you've got to make sure you don't leave it too late.
Oh, I meant like those last two portfolio ones. I'll get one of them out of the way and then do the second one, yeah.
Oh, I see, yes.
Yeah.
Okay, well, let's talk quickly about the tutorial one. Make sure you do some research into what makes a really good online tutorial. or video-based tutorial. Of course, if you can build some of those capacities in, don't just do it as a, if you're doing it based upon your current understanding of tutorials. Try and do a little bit of research into what really good online tutorials are about, and build in some of those ideas. Try to include a fairly clear structure. One good technique is to explain what you're going to be doing early in the tutorial, give a summary of it. So it's a little bit like doing a lesson plan, or doing a lesson, but obviously on a much smaller time frame. And you do need to explain things a little bit more in detail at the beginning of an online tutorial, because people will often, if they don't know what's coming up, they may turn off. It's not like a lesson where you've really got someone that's going to sit there for the time of the lesson. A tutorial, people will turn off if they don't think it's interesting, or if they don't think what's coming up will be interesting for them. So there's a few little skills and techniques in doing online tutorials that you probably should do a little bit of research in to do a really good one. Now we've got Greta mentioning that she's going to do one of the essay tasks. And yes, certainly those essay tasks are there to cater for all different preferences in what you'd like to do for your assessment. I do worry about people saying that they're not creative. Of course, everyone is creative. It's just often we've forgotten how to be creative. I'm sure when you were a 4-year-old, you were very creative. And I'm sure that creativity still exists within you. It's just you often suppress it and don't give it an opportunity to express itself. And as teachers, a lot of your effort will go into actually supporting your students in their creativity. Of course, students at all levels also think that they're not creative. But there are approaches and avenues that we can take to explore that creativity. But I do understand that there'll be certain tasks that you are more comfortable with, and that's why I've given you those various choices and options in your assessment. Now, Lee mentions that he's going to do the online test portfolio task. Is our analysis of the test supposed to be an analysis of how, why we've constructed the questions and the way we have? Well, let me just bring up that so I give you a considered answer to that question. Just going in and checking the question itself. While I'm doing that, does anyone else have any questions?
Yeah, I'm thinking of doing the QR code one and like planning a lesson or creating a lesson using QR codes, but I don't know how completed you want it to be. Like, does it have to be done so much that someone else can just grab it and use it straight away, or can I just explain how I intend to use it in a real lesson?
Well, you've only got 700 words, so you're not going to be able to go into a huge amount of detail in terms of doing it as a lesson plan and so forth. I might just get to that one in a second, and I'll answer Lee's question first about the online test. So here we're looking for analysis and use of non-multiple choice questions and applying their use to assess particular concepts. This will be assessed by reading deeply into module text, examples, and further reading into many types of online quizzes. Okay, so where I'm marking there is in terms of insight shown into the analysis and use of non-multiple choice questions. So it's not so much you have to analyze the test and write about your analysis of the test, but it's how well you use questions to analyze students' understanding during a quiz. So you can actually structure online quizzes, for example, to have branching. So based upon their responses to a question, you might then determine that students have got a complex understanding of the concepts or only a very basic understanding. And so then the next question, based upon how they've answered the first question, might lead to another basic question, or it might lead to a very complex question that really tests their understanding of the concepts. So that's what I'm saying in terms of analysis there. You can actually build into the structure of the quiz an understanding of how students are progressing through their assessment of that concept. You can also do that through various other types of quiz questions. So don't just use multiple choice or matching. Well, you can use matching. You can use also short essay analysis questions where it'll look for key words. There's also question types where you can have a jumbled sentence and have to put that sentence into order. But the real distinction there is whether or not you've thought about how those questions really determine students' understanding of a concept. It's quite easy to make up questions, but it's quite difficult to make up really good questions that give you really nuanced understanding of students' understanding of concepts. But do a little bit of research into online quizzes and online testing, or even just multiple choice test or testing in general. But it's probably best to go to online because that'll get you more direct information about that. And you'll see that there's quite a lot of research being done into how to construct good questions and how to draw the most amount of information out of an online quiz. Lee also asks us about the video tutorial. Do we include in the video a summary of what makes a good video tutorial, or do we just apply good features and you'll see that? In general, it's applying the good features. Yes, I don't really expect a huge amount of explanatory work for these activities. You can include a little bit if you need to, but your video should stand on its own in terms of the quality and why you've included certain aspects. If there's a particular controversial aspect that you've included that you want to include because you think it really achieves something, but that might not be obvious, then you might want to include a bit of explanation of why you've done that. But certainly don't go through and explain all the different aspects of what you've included where they're quite self-evident in the video itself. Okay, and we had the question about the QR codes, and if you could just remind me about what aspect of the QR codes you were querying while I find them. Oh, in terms of the detail of the lesson. Now again, if you could just describe the lesson or the activity that you would be using with QR codes, you don't need to make a lesson plan that other teachers could use or other people could use to replicate the activity. But it does need to get the high marks for it, you do need to have it very clearly achieving an educational outcome. So again, it's quite easy to make a good QR code activity, just creating a whole lot of QR codes and thinking about some sort of process and so forth. But how it actually achieves some specific student learning, that's what distinguishes a really good QR code activity from just a general QR code activity. So identify a particular thing you want to teach through the use of the QR codes and think about how QR codes will really help achieve that learning. And if you can show that through the video, that's what will make a distinguished presentation about QR codes rather than just a sort of a standard one.
Just with the educational app,
Yep.
a lot of, there are a lot of apps already out there. If you, I don't know, can you redo an app or taper it more to say what you want, then because I don't think I'd be able to come up with a brand new app
No, well, the apps that you're going to probably make will be web-based apps. So there are more complex ones. We can get into the programming and so forth. But what I would suggest is you think about a fairly simple type app. It might be like an instructional app for teaching students about a particular concept or some other aspect that you want to focus on. but you're not going to make like a Facebook app or something like that that's quite complex, and as you say, would be well beyond what we required for the course. So it's going to be a fairly simple type of app that goes through a series of pages, maybe some buttons, and things of that nature. So don't get too involved in trying to make a really complex application or computer program that works on a mobile device. And yes, if there are existing ones that you can modify, that would be fine, and you could contextualize them for the Gold Coast or for Brisbane or for a particular subject area. So that's certainly okay. But the app one probably is one of the more difficult challenges if you haven't done any sort of work in that area before.
Okay.
You can do some basic ones though, and I don't want to put you off that one. Of course, some web-based apps can be done quite easily, and don't have to be that involved in terms of the software. Of course, you can get programs online that will take you through the process. It's a bit like making a web page. But again, the high marks will come where you've thought about how it will actually be used to teach something and how it actually contributes to student learning. So just making the app, that'll get you a pass, no problems. But to really get the high marks, you've got to think about how will this contribute to students' learning, and how have you really sort of structured it so that that will be achieved.
So on the video tutorial, we can do e-portfolios.
Yes, you could do a tutorial
how to create
about
one.
Yes.
Okay, like how to create one, and then kind of how we would use it in classes and things that would benefit students and kids.
Yes, and again, the same sort of message I've sort of keep harping on. A pass would be just creating a video tutorial about e-portfolios. A higher achievement or a higher grade in that would be is where you've thought about how a video can be best used to teach about e-portfolios. What aspects of a video tutorial are going to make that more successful than not? So obviously being able to demonstrate certain things in step-by-step ways would be beneficial. There'll be other ways of doing it as well, but that's where you need to go and research video tutorials. You might want to look at a new video tutorials tool called Popcorn that helps, but there's a whole lot of other tools that are available for making good interactive video tutorials. Some of them can include quizzes as part of the tutorial. There's a whole lot of other things that you could think about in terms of achieving the learning outcome of students learning about making, in this case, e-portfolios, as opposed to just giving an explanation of what e-portfolios are through a video. Perry mentions, looks like I won't be doing an app then. Okay. Yes, now the app one is one of the more challenging ones, but I did want to include it for those that wanted to explore the use of apps. And it's not that hard, and certainly we teach our students in primary school how to make apps. So it's not a really complex thing, but it does take a different process of thought if you haven't done one before. So don't leave it to the last minute if you're doing an app solution. So other questions about your assessment, particularly about your portfolio items? So in each of them, I have given sort of what you have to do for a basic level, and then what's sort of expected at a more advanced level. But again, in general, it's how well that could be used in a classroom for teaching something is what is normally the distinguishing aspect for the advanced levels of the tasks. There are some essay-based ones. A lot of students that leave it to the last minute do the essay-based ones because that's more familiar for them.
Yeah, I think okay. I might do the MOOCs one.
Yes, the MOOC one is a very popular one and topical. And again, remember though, if you want the high grades, you need to show some insight into it. So just repeating what's on Wikipedia would probably get you a pass, but having done more in-depth research and coming up with what the actual real discussions are and some of the tensions around MOOCs would certainly be what would get a higher grade.
Do we have to provide like a reference list or anything for any information we've used, or?
For some of the activities, definitely. So certainly the essay-based activities where you're going to be referring to other people's ideas, and that there might be confusion as to whether or not they're your ideas or someone else's. You would have to reference those. If in an app development, for example, you were basing it upon someone else's app, you would have to reference that app. Okay, you need to remember what the purpose of referencing is. Well, there's various purposes, but in your context, it's to make sure that if you're using someone else's ideas, that you're acknowledging those ideas. And so you won't be then accused of plagiarism, where you're taking someone else's ideas and representing those as your own. So if there's a danger of that, if it's completely obvious, like if you're using Google Hangouts, and you're talking about Google Hangouts, you don't have to reference Google Hangouts because it's obvious that you didn't create Google Hangouts. Or if you're talking about ideas that someone has come up with, it might be Vygotsky's ideas about zone of possible development. You don't necessarily have to reference Vygotsky in that case because it's quite clear that you haven't come up with that idea. But if you're presenting an idea where you're presenting it as though it might be your idea, but it's actually someone else's, then you should reference that. Now, as students, you don't need to reference every image and piece of text in terms of copyright, because you do have the ability to publish material for university work that would normally infringe copyright. So that's not so much the issue, but the issue would be mostly around plagiarism and representing your work as where it's someone else's. That's what you have to be careful of in your assignment work. Okay, well, if there's no other questions about the assessment at the moment, oh, we do have one more from Lee. With the Machinima task, are we trying to show how virtual worlds can be used for educational activities? Also, do we use only one virtual world or more than one? Let me again just quickly check so I don't tell you it's incorrect. There's the Machinima one. Okay, the Machinima tour. Okay, well, you've got a choice. You can do it on one virtual world, or you could do it on several. And again, you're trying to show how learning could occur through the use of a Machinima virtual world tour or creation of Machinima. So simply creating some Machinima, so an animated series of characters talking in some sort of virtual world or game-based world, that would get you a pass. So the creation aspect would be the basic level. But actually creating Machinima that would be useful for teaching a concept, so teaching about ancient Rome or teaching about bullying, things of that nature, and really leveraging the use of that particular tool, so animated characters talking in a virtual space to teach a concept, that's what would get you the higher grades. So you've got to really think about, okay, what is the concept I'm trying to teach? How could a Machinima recording be useful in achieving that teaching or that learning for the students? And what would then have to be done within a virtual space or a computer game that would help achieve that learning? And that's where some research into the use of Machinima for education or other uses of videoing for education would assist you in then creating a tool or a Machinima recording that would demonstrate that. Okay, well, let's get back then to the topic for this week, which is looking at the digital technology subject, and particularly the teaching of the digital technologies in years 7 to 10. Now, it's quite different to teaching in years 7 to 10 to teaching in the primary years. In the primary years, it's really very much a familiarization of digital technologies, learning about the basic concepts of programming, of databases and of information, and of how the internet works, computers work, etc. But if you're asked to teach digital technologies in lower secondary, there are a lot more detailed concepts that you have to understand and be able to teach. Now, there's the fundamental ones of computational thinking, of algorithmic thinking, and things of that nature, and they sort of flow through the subjects. But if you're asked to teach the subject, you will have to do a whole lot of additional learning about particular skills and concepts. So the first basic one would be on programming. So you'd have to have an understanding of computer programming at a somewhat higher level to what we've looked at already in this course. So using a programming language such as Scratch, where you're just using drag and drop things, or Lego robotics, that would be okay as an introductory activity, but certainly towards years 7 and 8, you have to introduce a text-based programming language. So that's one where you actually have to type in commands, and that would be unfamiliar for many teachers. So you need to learn about that. It's not that much harder than doing the Scratch type programming, but it's just a different way of thinking about programming, where you've got to give instructions as sentences, basically, as textual commands. And there's got a very specific syntax and grammar, where if you put a full stop or an incorrect word or an incorrect comma, or sorry, brackets is the most common one, then the program won't work correctly. So a little bit like algebra in mathematics, if you put things in the wrong order in terms of the algebraic expression, then it won't give the correct answer. Same as within computer programming, because computer programs go through and perform instructions exactly as written. And so if it's not exactly as it's expecting to be interpreted, then an incorrect result will appear. So teaching digital technologies will involve a little bit more understanding of computer programming. Not a huge amount though, and there's lots of textbooks and online guides and instructional programs that you can even have students go and work with independently. But in order to guide them in those online tutorials, etc., you do have to have a reasonable understanding of what's being taught. And then in years 9 and 10, you have to introduce what's called object-oriented programming. Again, it's not a hugely complex process, and indeed you could use Scratch for teaching object-oriented programming and a whole lot of other tools that are very easy to use, but you have to teach it in a slightly different way, and you have to understand then what object-oriented means. Fundamentally, object-oriented programming is we consider everything in the program to be objects, and they have properties, and we change those properties. And so, for example, changing the property of a picture might make the picture larger. And the advantage of that is that if we describe our program to make the picture larger, we could change that picture whenever we wanted to, and the program would still work, making it larger or smaller, just with a new picture now being inserted. So we don't have to change the entire program. We've just changed one aspect of an object within the program. So before we go on to other concepts that you need to have a bit of an understanding of, what do you think about programming? Would you feel confident that with a little bit of work you'd be able to teach years 7, 8, or 9 and 10 programming?
I remember we had to make a website in year 9 using programming. I quite enjoyed it. It was fun. Definitely that sort of aspect of math and that sort of stuff kind of really goes with my brain. So yeah.
Absolutely, and there's lots of great linkages between maths and programming, and indeed programming came out of mathematics. So having a logical thought processes and understanding mathematics tends to mean you can program quite well, because you're quite used to structuring instructions as you would with a mathematical formula in a way that can lead to a solution.
Yeah, it's just really organized as well, like the way it goes through. It just makes sense than having like a jumble of stuff.
It does, and yes, certainly that is one aspect of programming that a lot of people do enjoy in the very structured nature of programs. And certain students that really like that structure find programming very easy, because they know that if they give the correct instructions, then they'll have a a known output achieved from that set of instructions, whereby in art or in English composition, etc., it's never that cut and dried. You don't know that from a given set of inputs or effort, you'll achieve a certain output from that. You may hope to achieve a certain output, but it's not as cut and dried as with computer programming. So there's lots and lots of resources available for computer programming, though. So don't be put off by it. And really, you can just guide students through the use of those resources without having an in-depth understanding of computer programming yourself when you're starting out with these tools. Now, Greta mentions that she likes Scratch programming. However, I think the kids would be teaching me by the end of the lesson. And that's okay for the first 1 or 2 times you might do it. And as a way of learning yourself and learning as students are learning as well, that's perfectly okay. The caution I give, though, is if teachers get into that habit and say, we'll just allow the students to do that themselves and they'll teach me, or even worse, they'll teach themselves and I'll just assist a little bit without trying to have an understanding yourself, that's a lazy approach, and that's won't sustain you in the long term as a teacher. So it's perfectly okay if you're just learning something new yourself and the students learn it with you the first year or 2 that you might do that, but at some point you would be expected to get ahead of the students so that you can structure their learning more effectively. Now there's a few other concepts, though, in digital technologies that you have to come to grips with. Probably the hardest one would be around information systems and databases, because computers do a lot of work with information, and putting those into a database that you can then query is a very important skill, particularly in years 9 and 10, that you need to teach. So you'll all be very used to searching for things on Google, where you put in some keywords and you get 100,000 returns. Querying, or using a structured query language, which is called SQL, and things of that nature, means that when you put in your search, like you would in Google, you have to structure your search parameters, or how you put the search in, so that you only ever retrieve one exact result. So it'd be like searching for something on Google and knowing you want to get just that one page, and that's the only page that will be returned in Google. So you can think about that. Say if you're doing a query on your bank statement. You want to have your query result in just your bank statement appearing. You don't want to have 10,000 people's bank statements appearing. It just wants to return your particular bank statement. It might be for one particular account, and it might even be for a particular day and a particular transaction. Of course, if you want to do some mathematical manipulation, for example, on that piece of data that you're retrieving, you want to know that, that you're going to retrieve one specific piece of data that can then be put into, say, a formula. You don't want to retrieve the date when you wanted to actually get the value of the transaction. So that's where we use a particular programming language called SQL, or structured query language, that retrieves some specific information. Has anyone used a structured query language or something similar to that before? No? Okay. That's not unusual, but it's something that we want to address in this new subject. Of course, searching for information is one thing, but actually querying information and getting an exact piece of information back is something altogether different. And it does mean we have to be much more formal in how we search for information, but also how we store information. And creating a database or an information system that stores information so that we can get exactly what we want out of it is a skill that you do need to teach in years 9 and 10. But it's something that we've been teaching in our senior subjects for a long time, and it's not a particularly difficult thing to do again. There are lots of tools that are available to assist you in teaching that, but it's another area that you would need to learn about, particularly in teaching it in years 9 and 10. A few other things you'd have to come to grips with is a bit of more understanding about how computers work themselves in terms of the internal bits and bytes and binary code, and how things occur inside the computer. But again, there's lots of textbooks and resources that you would be able to use to help you teach that. Just as if you were asked to teach an area of biology or physics or maths that you weren't fully familiar with, there'll be lots of resources available to help you teach the other areas. But there's lots of fun areas also to teach in digital technologies, such as artificial intelligence, and then you can bring in sort of movies such as The Matrix or the various other movies that are coming out more recently about the idea of putting your consciousness inside a computer and what that might be like, and exploring those ideas with your students. So there's lots of fun, interesting things there. You can explore social and ethical issues around hacking and look at various movies and stories and novels that have involved hacking, and then explore the values of when it's right or wrong to download various things, when it's okay to download music or movies, and when it's not okay, and the legal and social and ethical implications around those issues are always interesting ones to raise with students. So has anyone got any other questions about digital technologies to help guide this discussion? I don't want to sort of be anyone talking here.
Yeah, I think I'm not as so confident with it. I think that having to teach it would be a bit of a daunting, but I know that if we had the support there, that would be pretty easy.
Absolutely, and it will be a difficult subject area to teach, but that said, it can be very rewarding, because one aspect is that it's often project-based, and you have students working on projects and things of that, which will often guide their own learning. And you can just provide support material to assist that project-based learning approach. The other important aspect is because it's not necessarily as high stakes as certainly mathematics and some of the areas of science, you can be a lot more exploratory with your students and try out new ideas and new approaches, and there's not as much there's not the same sort of consequences as if you were teaching mathematics and you started teaching some of those concepts incorrectly. If you were teaching a few of the concepts incorrectly in digital technologies, then you could sort of work through that process with your students and explore those ideas. Whereby if you did it in maths or some of the areas of science, that would be rather more problematic. So in that respect, it can be a fun area to teach where you're not under as much pressure to do everything absolutely correctly. Not as an excuse not to always keep trying to improve in terms of digital technologies, but there's certainly areas that yeah, you can get away with more. The other aspect is you can incorporate a lot more competitions and project-based learning with external sources. So getting students involved in a robotics competition or one of the computer programming competitions, and structuring your course around that means that that will take a lot of pressure off you as well, in that you're then just assisting them in terms of engaging with those competition activities, making sure that they align with the curriculum, that most of them will nowadays, and that can be a nice, easy way of also working through. And even working with other schools, having your students work in a collaborative way online with students in another school where their teacher might be more familiar with the teaching of digital technologies. That could be an approach that you could engage with. So let's put the scenario out. You've got a job, you're teaching in your favorite teaching area, and you've also been asked to teach a Year 9 class in digital technologies. Okay. Quite a fairly high probability scenario. What would be the first thing you would do to try to prepare to teach this new subject? And to make it worse, it's the very first time it's been taught in your school, and there's no resources available that the school already has. So what are you going to do?
Would you plan it with another teacher? Like collaborate with another teacher first, and then bounce off ideas, and then structure like with different digital technologies that you could teach the kids at that level?
Absolutely, that'd be a great first step, because in the main, for Year 9 subjects or Year 9 or middle school subjects, there will be other teachers also teaching in that area. So it's not like some of the senior subjects where you might be the only teacher. There'll almost certainly be other teachers also having to go through that same process, and working collaboratively then is a great first step. Christiana, you had something.
Yeah, you'd have to first, like, there'd obviously be stuff from the Australian curriculum that you'd have to teach in it, so you'd have to look at that and see what you might have to upskill yourself in, you and the other teachers. Yeah.
Now, very good. That'll be certainly one of the first things you need to do, is get the curriculum documents, and you'll probably be then asked to come up with a work program, is what we call them in senior schools, of what's going to be actually taught in your subject, and that would probably also be something that would be done collaboratively with other teachers, and hopefully also with the head of department, who will guide you through some of the more technical aspects of a work program development. Now, Greta mentions going to some PD days and watching some YouTube videos and collaborating with other schools. Yes, all good ideas. There will be some resources available, but you will probably have to go out and find them, and they may not be obvious. So, for example, the website that I've had you look at this week, which is being developed by the Queensland Society for Information Technology and Education, of resources for teachers who would be asked to teach digital technologies this year or next year or in the next few years. So there'll be those resources available, but they will not necessarily be very obvious, and you may have to go searching for them. And there may be PD days put on, but again, they may not be obvious, and you might have to go through and actually seek them out. If you're in an independent school, through the ISQ, Independent Schools Association of Queensland. But also, if you're working in the Department of Education, there'll be the Learning Place, which is their online learning system. It will have links to various PD days and online webinars and other resources to help you come to grips with the new subject. So what's some other things though? You've started to get your head around doing up a unit plan. You've started to find some resources. What are some other things you could do?
I don't know.
I think it's just so hard to, like, it would be so hard to teach for having done it the first time in the school. So having hardly any resources would be quite difficult. But maybe going to another school that actually has done it.
Good. Well, actually visiting another school and seeing how they're doing it is a very common approach, and talking with them, and actually ideally sitting in on one of their classes, or certainly in their staff room, and talking with the teachers and how they've approached it, is a very useful way. Just like what we have you do when you go out onto practicums and observe what's happening in various schools, but you can still do that as a beginning teacher. In fact, it's often encouraged. Even for experienced teachers, it's a good strategy to use. Okay, so you've got 2 weeks before the semester starts, and you've got to start teaching this subject. What are some other things you need to start thinking about? So let's say so far you've decided you're going to teach some Scratch programming and some information system development using Microsoft Access, and a unit on artificial intelligence where you're going to watch the video AI. What are some things you need to start making sure you've thought about?
Researching it?
Yep, good. So finding out how other people have taught these subjects and different approaches, and starting maybe to develop up some lesson plans. Because you've got your unit plans, but then you've got to turn those into lesson plans. And the more you can get those done before you start teaching, the saner you'll be. Just doing lesson plans up the night before you teach is probably not the best strategy, and certainly doesn't give you a long-term strategy when you've got a class that you're used to teaching for a lot. It might work fine when you're on practicums and so forth, when you just do 1 or 2 lessons, But when you're teaching a class for 10 weeks, you want to plan things out so that students sequentially and developmentally learn about concepts. That's where you take your unit plans and turn them into lesson plans.
Also, you're going to make sure you have all the resources.
So you got this.
Making sure you have the resources for the kids as well, like obviously laptops, and then making sure that they can use this type of digital technology through devices.
Absolutely, and you've got to make sure that the software is installed, or access to the websites that you want to use are available, and things of that nature. And also, a very important thing is to have plan Bs if the technology fails. Particularly at the beginning of a school year, you may have the school's computers go down or the servers go down, and so you have to make sure that you've got backup lesson activities if those things occur. Now, one thing we may not have mentioned too much in this course is there's a whole lot of resources available called Computer Science Unplugged, where there are activities that you can do. We might have a look at those next week, actually. But there are activities that you can do that you don't need to actually have the computer. So there'll be things like learning how to program through interpretive dance, quite literally, where you do various dance steps that replicate a sequence from a computer program. Or a whole lot of other activities that you can use to get across concepts where you don't actually have to do programming on an actual computer itself.
You need assessment items and goals that you're working towards. Maybe assignments or an exam or something like that.
Absolutely, and it's one thing that a lot of teachers do forget about. And the worst case situation is where you start thinking about the exam in like weeks 8 or 9, and you start preparing your exam, and you suddenly realize that there's a whole lot of things that you haven't taught them that you now need to assess them about. Or worse, you assess them on things that you haven't taught them about. So you need to do your assessment planning before the course begins. Now, it's not to say that the assessment should drive the learning activities, because that can be dangerous where you just do everything around the assessment. But if you use assessment effectively, it will actually be part of the learning process, particularly for a project-based learning pedagogy, where you're using the students working through projects where they're being assessed on various stages of that project all the way through. Assessment can be a very important part of the learning. So when that's the case, you have to really think about assessment quite early on so that it then helps complement what students are going to be learning and how they're going to learn.
Well, you could kind of do what you did for us, but have an item every single week that they have to complete, but they can do it to their own level and do it to their own ability, topics and everything as well, because then they can actually learn as they go, be assessed on it as they go, but don't have it such a huge assessment that they're very overwhelmed with it.
Absolutely, that's one strategy, and that's where we use progressive assessment. That's slightly different, though, to project-based learning and assessment through a project task. If, for example, for this course, I gave you the project of coming up with a, what would be something appropriate? Say, an information system that tested students on their understanding of physics, and you had to create a computer environment or an online environment and a computer programs and online tests and all the rest that helped achieve that goal. And the whole course was structured around you doing that. That would be project-based learning. And we often do that in high school, where we might give them the task or the problem, say, of coming up with a solution to an environmental issue in the school that can be addressed through digital technologies. And so the students might come up with ideas such as, say, a better way of monitoring whether or not students are putting rubbish in the rubbish bins. So it might be something that tracks how many items go into the rubbish bin and uses a light sensor to count that, and then a computerized system that keeps track of that And if too few items go into the rubbish bin, then maybe it sounds an alarm and a warning to everyone that they need to pick up their rubbish. So it could be some sort of solution like that the students might work on throughout the whole 10 weeks of their program, and you would then have guiding activities during that where you would teach them about using light sensors and doing the programming to do counting, and then some sort of system for working out if it was above or below a certain number and then sounding an alarm. So there'd be various concepts that you teach them, but that would be just one of their possible solutions. Another group might come up with a very different solution where they're having a database where students are putting in rubbish into recycling bins and getting points, and then the database keeps track of their points and awards various benefits like extra time playing computer games in the library or something like that based upon their scores that they were getting. So that would be a different solution to the problem of addressing littering in the school, but with a different digital solution, but often with the same sort of activities that you'd help support them as they went through the term. And that would be a project-based learning approach to digital technologies. But during your course of study, you'll learn more about project-based learning as you do various pedagogy subjects. But digital technology is one of the ones that can certainly be taught in a project-based way quite effectively. Doesn't have to be. As you said, it could be a more progressive, skill-based, activity-based learning program where you're doing a whole lot of small activities like what we've done in this course. But a project-based learning is also another alternative. Okay, so that's one aspect you do need to think about to an extent, although it's hard as a beginning teacher, is what pedagogy you're going to use. What approach to teaching you're going to incorporate for your teaching of digital technologies. And digital technologies is one where project-based learning is a viable option. And the other things you need to think about before you start teaching this new subject. Let's say we're now a week away. You've got a whole lot of lesson plans done up. You've made sure your computers are working and your software is installed. What other things do you need to think about?
Do you have to get them verified? Like your lesson plans and everything, do you have to get them like accepted or something by the principal or
That'll
whatever?
depend upon your school. Generally, no. But some heads of department and even some normally the principal doesn't unless you're in a very small school, but some heads of department and some deputies might ask to see some of your lesson plans. If you're having some difficulties, they might ask to see them more regularly and in a more structured way. But generally, you'll be expected to be able to do that on your own. Often a good idea to seek out advice on your lesson plans of more experienced teachers or heads of departments, etc., when you're just starting out. But yeah, normally it's not something that they'll monitor in great detail. It's probably a benefit if they are. Of course, they'll give you more feedback and assistance. But once you've done your practicum experience, where you will be monitored in great detail, it's generally assumed that you've got those capacities to be able to start teaching. Almost certainly they will want to see your assessment tasks, particularly if you're teaching across a group. But if there's more than one class of that year level, you'll probably be doing that collaboratively anyhow, so it won't be all pressure upon you as a beginning teacher. But you never know, you might be lucky enough to be the only one teaching the subject, whereby you have to do it all yourself. But then, of course, you'll have more freedom to make your own decisions as to what's included and what's not included in that respect. So any other things you need to start thinking about?
What about like your diverse students? You have to think of ways to incorporate them into your lesson plan, because I know that sometimes you don't know your class until you get them, kind of thing.
Very good, and that's the one I was waiting for someone to bring up.
Yeah.
You need to think about your student. And In the main, you may not know about them, and certainly on practicum you may not know about them. But once you're an actual teacher in a school, you will have a fairly good idea of the sorts of students coming into your class from the previous years. You can talk to the previous year's teachers. Sometimes you can go and look at their record, the student records. Sometimes you may even have them having digital portfolios where you can go back and look at all the actual work that they've been doing in their past years. Remember, digital technologies is a developmental curriculum, and it may not be the very first year or two it started, but after that, students will be coming into your class with an established body of knowledge about digital technologies. So you're not going to be teaching them as though they don't know anything about technology and about computers and all the rest. Just like with maths, you can have a general assumption that students will come into your class with a base level of knowledge into year 9 from what they should have learnt in year 8 and previous years. That said, though, of course, there will be some differentiated students whereby you'll have some students come in with a lot of knowledge and some that will come in with very little knowledge. Computing can be one of the extremes, though, whereby you'll have some students that will come in that they may have a passion about computing, and they'll have an incredible amount of knowledge about computer programming and about other things in computing. And you're going to have to cope with those, probably even more so than what you would do in sciences and mathematics, where you might have a student come in who's been involved in computer competitions and robotic competitions and things of that nature out of school, and they know your curriculum back to front. So you're going to have to come up with a whole lot of coursework and material for them to work on that's going to be well in advance of what you're going to be doing with the rest of your students. And how you cope with that will be a very important challenge. Now, of course, with that, you've got access to various online programs and extension activities and enrichment activities available there, various competitions you might have those students get involved in. But that's where you've got an opportunity to differentiate your classroom. Now, in the ideal classroom, every student would have a differentiated program where they'd all be doing different things based upon their particular interests and their level of ability. And it's something that's almost possible in a digital technologies classroom, where if you're using a lot of online instructional material, you could give students various tasks to do and learning activities based upon their ability level, and they might be very different in terms of what other students are doing. But that said, that does take confidence as a teacher to be able to achieve. And as a beginning teacher, you're probably not going to be confident enough to really differentiate your classroom to a great degree. Now, certainly you will have to do it for your very advanced students and for those that have learning needs and are struggling. So you will have to make some differentiation regardless. But over time, as you become a better, more effective teacher, you'll do more and more differentiation, and you'll allow students to do different things in your classroom based upon their interests and upon their ability levels. But yes, finding out about your students, finding out if you've got one of those exceptional students coming into your classroom, finding out if you've got some students coming into your classroom that have got particular learning needs, and making sure you incorporate into your more general collective instructional program opportunities for those students to do different things. Any other things you need to think about? Okay, well, let's bring it back more to earth, and let's think about if you're going out onto practicum and you were going to be asked to teach this in a few months' time. What would you have to be thinking about in that case? Here, though, you've got a supporting teacher, a supervising teacher that will be there to assist you.
I think what you're going to teach, maybe. You think of like really creative ideas, how to engage them, so you look better than the other teacher.
No, absolutely. But the thing is, you need to fit in with their program of study. So when you're on practicum, you don't get to teach your students for the whole year. You get to teach them for, worst case, 1 or 2 lessons, best case, sort of a week or 2. And so you need to find out what the students have been learning what their current abilities are, and what the teacher wants you to teach them. So you won't have as much freedom to structure a program of study and to develop up, say, project-based learning, unless they're also already involved in a project-based learning mode. So you need to find out exactly what you want, or your supervising teacher wants them to learn, and then you get to come up with the structure of the lesson and the activities around that. But the big difficulty there is that, yes, you might know all about Scratch or Lego robotics and be able to incorporate those, but if that needs a lot of lead time in terms of basic skills in order for students then to be able to do more advanced things, and the teacher wants you to do the advanced things based upon what they've already been using, you need to fit in with what the teacher already has in place. So in many respects, practicum teaching can be more difficult because you don't have that freedom to structure things and developmentally progress your students throughout the entire year, and you do need to fit in with what they want done. But that said, there is often the opportunity to showcase new ideas and things that the practicum or your supervising teacher won't have thought about, things that you might have seen in this course and throughout your other research that you will have the opportunity to do. Of course, you'll find that when you develop up your lessons on practicum, you'll spend a lot more time developing those up than the time that your supervising teacher would have available to do that. Because you might only be teaching 2 or 3 lessons that week, while your supervising teacher might be teaching 20 lessons that week. So you will have an opportunity to do a lot more creative things than what the supervising teacher would normally have an opportunity to do. And so it would be expected that you bring in a lot of interesting new ideas in that way. So what other things? Now, none of you guys have been out on practicums yet. Have you been out on any observation visits to schools?
That's next semester.
Okay, so you're doing it next semester, yep. So again, that'll be great opportunities for you to see how different things are being taught in the classroom, but also look at how teachers teach things differently. Now, your teachers are going to have very different pedagogies, very different approaches to teaching, very different management styles of how they manage their classrooms. Digital technologies is one of those learning areas where you can be a lot freer in your management style and where you can allow students to work independently a lot more and work in groups and do group work, and a lot of approaches that you may not have an opportunity to do in, say, a maths classroom or a science classroom. Not to say you can't, but there's more opportunities and more flexibility often in a digital technologies classroom than you may find in some other classrooms. Okay, any other thoughts about the practicalities of teaching digital technologies? Okay, well, probably one other area I want to focus on is the philosophy behind the subject. Now, just as with science, you teach about the scientific method and science literacy, and in mathematics, you're teaching about mathematical literacy and basic foundational computational skills and so forth. Digital technologies has got a philosophy underpinning it, and to be a really good teacher of digital technologies, you've got to approach the subject from that perspective. Now, a few main things is, the first is around futures thinking, where you're getting students to think about how to improve the future through their actions, through their digital solutions, that they can create things that will affect their future. The other is around computational thinking, and these are fundamentally whereby we want students to understand how computers and digital technologies work so that they are confident in using them in ways where someone that hasn't got that understanding wouldn't be confident in using them. So, for example, using an iPad. Certain people will come and use an iPad in certain ways, but if you understand how to make your own apps on an iPad, then if you come to a problem that you want to use your iPad for, say it's going to be for data collection for a scientific experiment, someone that has got one particular perspective on the use of computers would go, okay, I need to find an existing program that I can use to collect my data and store it on the iPad so I can then use that for collecting data about this experiment I want to conduct. And they may spend some time looking for that app, and if they can't find it, then they would say, well, okay, well, that can't be done. Someone that's got a reasonably good understanding of digital technologies would go, okay, let's see if there's an app available. Okay, there's not one directly available. There might be one that I could repurpose for the use of that experiment. Or if I can't find that, I might write my own app that would allow me to collect data and store it about that experiment. And so that's where someone that's empowered with an understanding of digital technologies looks at that problem very differently in terms of trying to use a technology for a particular context. And that's what we want to empower our students with in terms of whatever relationship they have with technology throughout their lives and their various careers. They'll be able to view the use of technology in ways where they feel empowered to either find their own solution through the use of existing technologies, or if those solutions don't exist, to have those solutions created, either by themselves or they might employ someone else to create them when they're in business and so forth, but not to allow technology to be a limiting factor. Not to say, okay, I can't see a technology that can solve that for me that someone else has created, so I won't be able to use the technology. They'll go and say, okay, I need a technology to be able to do this. I need to either find it or either have it created or create it myself. And that's a very different perspective on the use of technologies. And that's what we want to get students empowered with through their study of digital technologies over the 11 years that they will be studying it in school. So what do you think about that? How do you think you might approach teaching digital technologies in terms of trying to empower students with that understanding of digital technologies?
I think it make them more open to other types of, I don't know, ways to teach kids as well.
Okay, that's an interesting perspective. In terms of you as a teacher teaching kids different ways?
Yeah, like they'll be open to doing more more things with different subjects as well, like the types of technologies. They'd be able to do different things and showcase different things. Like when it comes to assessment-wise, they'd be able to do different stuff, and they'd be able to do things online and.
Absolutely, no, and that's where we talk again about instructional technologies, and that's what we've been mostly focused on in this course. And yes, teachers of digital technologies probably will be more open to using other technologies or ICTs in their various courses, and certainly they'll be more empowered to be able to do so if they can create their own software or solutions using digital technologies. And eventually students, as they come through and become teachers, where they've been using digital technology, or they've been studying digital technologies throughout their schooling, will become better teachers because they'll be much more empowered with the use of digital technologies. That's more of a long-term strategy of improvement. But yes, certainly the teachers of digital technologies will hopefully have it rub off on them as well in terms of when they try to teach the philosophies of digital technologies, they'll, and you guys, will hopefully engage with that as a lens upon the world yourselves and be able to see solutions through the use of digital technologies whereby other teachers may not be able to see those solutions.
You were talking about creativity before also. I think that helps students be more creative, and they get a sense that they can use their creativity in school, and it makes the tasks more authentic also, I think.
No, absolutely, Maria, and that's a very good one. Yeah, teaching creativity is a very challenging task, and it's something we do really, really badly in schools. In fact, there's a lot of studies looking at whether or not we actually teach students to be uncreative through the schooling process. And we actually destroy their creativity around about years 4 and 5. And then as they progress through schooling, we progressively actually reduce their level of creativity. and obviously that's not a great thing, particularly as a lot of employment in the future will be around your ability to be creative and to value add to your various employment area, including as teachers, whereby if you're just someone that does what everyone else does, computers and other technologies can generally replace that in many industries. That is the creativity and the innovativeness that you can bring to a particular employment area. That's what's of most value. So we do have to look at ways of improving student creativity, and digital technologies and design and technology are subjects that have embedded in them a creative process whereby students are trying to come up with solutions to problems, and their ability to be creative in that solution development is an important aspect. But yes, creativity is a very important one, and one that we do very badly in schools, and we're trying to find ways to address that, and digital technologies is part of that. Is there any other aspects? I know this has been only a very brief introduction to digital technologies. Ideally, this would be like a 13-week course or 12-week course where you'd be learning about it in depth, but it's a very new subject area. In fact, it's only just being introduced into schools next year. So I did want to give you a bit of an introduction to it in case it does become an opportunity for you to teach in schools. And I actually do think it will be something that you will be asked to teach, because very few other teachers will have experience in it, and often they give new difficult areas to beginning teachers that the other teachers don't necessarily want to teach. So you may very much find that you're given the challenge of teaching digital technologies when you get out into schools. So having a bit of an understanding of it is an important aspect. Okay, well that's probably all I really wanted to cover about digital technologies though this week. Next week we'll have a look at Computer Science Unplugged and a few of the other approaches you can use, and also some of the support networks that we can build into you as a beginning teacher for use of teaching of all aspects of computing. So we don't want to just limit it to digital technologies. The main focus of this course is about use of other ICTs to improve your teaching, as of course you're finding in the various assessment items at the moment. But do we have any questions that have arisen as we've been discussing about assessment again? So I know that's probably an area that you're most interested in just in these few weeks. It sounds like most of you guys have got a pretty good handle on the assessment as you're going through now, and you just need to progress that through. So I'm not too concerned. Probably more concerned of those that aren't attending these sessions, but hopefully their learning styles mean that they find they don't need to attend these live sessions. But is there any other support I can provide you as you're working through on your assessment and discuss with you over the next final few weeks? Or is there any area of educational technologies you feel we could discuss a bit more about? Okay. It is a teaching strategy whereby you actually work with your students to get them to develop the curriculum and what's going to be taught in a course. But unfortunately with these courses, because it's often a very new area for you guys, you don't have a lot of feedback to provide into the decisions about what's taught. But if you do come up with things that you would like to learn more about in the last few weeks, we do have a bit of flexibility to incorporate some of those, and I'll build those into what we discuss and the resources that we look at. But it looks like you guys have run out of questions and things to discuss, so we might finish up a little bit early again this week, unless you've got any final questions. Or anyone online got any questions, comments? points to raise? Okay then, well I'll let you get back to completing your assessment tasks.
Okie dokie.
Okay, bye bye for now.
Bye.